Hey, what's up, everybody? You know what time it is. Your boy Jeffrey L. Boney here for another hot edition of Real Talk Junkies Live. As always, I want to encourage everybody to tune in, share the link with all your friends, your family, your foes, your enemies. It doesn't matter. Everybody needs to check out today's show. As always, we have a wealth of information, great conversation, and great guests. So today, of course, I want you to go visit Forward Times at forwardtimes.com. Check out the latest news for and about the African American community. And of course, you can engage with me by going to my website, jeffreylboney.com, picking up my latest book, Don't Argue With Me, a no-nonsense approach to the issues in the black community. With that being said, man, talking about the black community, there's been a lot of dialogue, a lot of conversation about the G word. I'm talking about gentrification. It becomes an ugly conversation depending on who's leading that conversation. But for the most part, when it comes to African Americans, there tends to be this thought process that, you know, everybody is taking over the community. At one point in time, you got to keep in mind some of the areas that are now dominated by the African American community were once held and populated and dominated by white communities and white residents. And so with white flight, many of them left out, and those areas that are high-end areas in many of our cities and towns across the greater United States, especially in metropolitan areas, have become more black. And now some of those white individuals that once left through white flight are now coming back into the inner city, coming back into the areas that they once had residence in and left, and now they're coming back to be closer to downtown and various other areas. To talk about this issue, somebody who has an extensive knowledge in the area of real estate, an investment in the community, and can shed some light on the G word, gentrification, is none other than a real estate guru in his own right, someone that is well respected and known in the greater Houston community and across the greater Houston area, none other than Gerald Womack, the owner of Womack Development and Investments. Come on in. Yeah. All right. Welcome to Real Talk today, good sir. I appreciate you, man.
Yes.
All right, I had to get the guru on.
Well, you know, I am just thrilled to be here.
Good.
Because I was raised up at Truxello and Dowling.
Yeah.
My family, we all was raised up there all together.
Yeah.
And we was raised up right in the middle of places where people said they did not want to live. Not only did they not want to live, they didn't even want to own the property. There were instances and that I know of since I've been in real estate that families during that time, they just gave them the property, very little down. They wasn't financing necessarily available, and in a lot of cases the properties was in such bad repair to a lot of families, black families had to work those 2-3 jobs, you know, teach school, work for the post office, you know, all kind of part-time jobs to be able to maintain and to be able to buy that house. And what happened is that people moved from the lower end of Third Ward, or they moved from the north side, far north side, and then they moved farther south, coming this way, coming toward South McGregor, coming toward Riverside Terrace, coming into Washington Terrace. And a lot of them during that time, you know, they went to school at Texas Southern University, so that was attractive because they were able to go to school, they were able to live in the neighborhood, and during that time, what was so significant was that GI Bill. We had so many African Americans that were in the military that the only way they could buy that house is that back then the Jews owned them. They could get a VA loan.
And what years are we talking about here?
That's in the early 70s, 60s.
The late 60s?
Late 60s, early 70s.
So right after the Civil Rights Bill and the Civil Rights Act and all that.
They were able to use that GI Bill to buy these properties that nobody else wanted. And the VA had committed themselves that to a veteran that we would give you a loan at 100%. And a lot of African American family, they was using that VA loan to go to school, and a lot of them used the VA loan to buy a home.
So let me ask you a question. You talked about how these houses nobody wanted. When you say nobody, you're talking about nobody black or nobody white or nobody period?
Well, no, absolutely there was nobody period, but black people had nowhere else to go.
Okay.
In a lot of instances, there's only certain places they could go. They moved further out toward the Sunnyside community, as people call Sunnyside, Texas. But because if you came from Fifth Ward or you came from Far North, Fourth Ward, there was a better clientele of homes. These homes were all brick. A lot of them were 2 stories. A lot of them, the square footage were larger. And a lot of them were custom homes that was built for these particular Jewish families. And so for them, it was a great opportunity. I mean, they bought those homes $25,000 in some cases back then. $25,000. And in some cases, you know, you move further south toward McGregor, where you got more acreage, you may have paid $50,000 to $75,000. But it was a great opportunity, and a lot of families took that opportunity. And as I said, they worked toward buying them and purchasing them and paying them off and building up that wealth. That was the only way that a black family could build wealth, because they didn't have any money to put in the bank. The only way they could build wealth is if they knew if they bought that house. And then once that family bought that house, they were able to get student loans. If they wasn't a veteran, they could send that kid to college, and they would be willing to sign that document that, hey, you know, on that application, I own my home. And I'm going to use this money. If I don't pay the student loan back for my kid, I'll at least have the collateral of this equity that I'm building in real estate. And so that created a ploy of people, of African Americans who worked hard and wanted to have home ownership. I mean, the Black Real Estate Association back then was very popular. They gave more brokers license here in Texas, more African Americans brokers license in Texas. Even at Texas Southern University, they had a real estate school for blacks who were interested in getting involved in the real estate business, that they could actually get a Texas license and be a broker. And a lot of them were on part-time jobs. A lot of them worked at the post office. A lot of them teach school. And they would go to work during the day, and then they would come in the evenings or the days that they were off during the summer, and they would work in real estate. And that was their way of helping families being able to have what we call home ownership. And so that populated, and so happened it built wealth. Its location was good because it was close to downtown. But back then, nobody wanted it. That was a stigma that it was crime in the neighborhood. You know, we were very fortunate enough, you know, so many things happened. We talk about when the wine gardens was on Alameda, where blacks couldn't sit at the Alameda table. When Alameda was a business district before anything was down Alameda. The Forward Times in my business and several other businesses was down Alameda, but people left Alameda. It was only when Dr. Coleman and that group Dr. John B. Coleman and that group got together, and they built, Barbara Jordan was there at their opening, and they built that Chase Bank building. That's when Chase Bank New York Life Insurance was able to let Dr. Coleman and that group build that building. And so after that, it later came all this monopoly of black professionals having a professional building, which gave a lot of attention to blacks really moving, black professional people with money, wanting to live in the Third Ward. And that's when all your professional blacks, doctors and lawyers, Ned Wade, as I remember, Dr. Edith Jones, her house was in Ebony back then. All those folks built houses or bought these homes that the Jewish families owned, and they were large homes. They were, you know, all these Jewish famous names, the Sackwoods and the Weingardens and the Battlesteins, all those people built their house. I sold the house on South McGregor, and they said to me that Mrs. Sackwoods, Mrs. Weingardens, went to Beverly Hills, and she told her husband, she said, you know, I want that house, just like that. And they brought the architect back to Houston, and they built that house for the Weingardens family. Very unusual, unique home on 2.5 acres of land. And so it was unique because what happened to Jews, the Jewish people, could not live in River Oaks And so they built their own neighborhood.
Why couldn't they live in River
Well,
Ridge?
because back then, same racism issues that we have, or maybe even worse, they were not allowed, because they was Jewish, to live in that neighborhood. And that's how they came in the black neighborhood and bought up the grocery stores and the businesses that we owned back then. And when we moved farther this way, a lot of them sold. And a lot of those businesses we bought. We bought the land, we bought the buildings. Even during my time, I bought a building, 2 buildings in Midtown now, and they said, you know what, I paid $50,000 for it. And it was so bad till I only paid $1,000 down, and they financed the balance. But they didn't want it. They said, we want it out of here, because they thought it was crime. They thought the neighborhood was bad, and they just thought the property's bad. And now that same property is assessed about $600,000, just one of them, because what has happened with gentrification, people have moved in.
So I want to talk about this gentrification. But before we talk about that, because I want to get extensively involved in that conversation, let's talk about you real quick and how you got into real estate.
Well, just that same street that I just mentioned, Truxell and Darling, where I came from, that was a real estate company on the corner from my house. Where there was a real estate broker, a guy named George Coleman, and he, I was a young kid, oldest, and very adventurous, strong work ethic, mother hardworking, and I started working in his office, very young. And then he led my mother to say that, this kid is smart. And there's something in this real estate book that talks about that he can have his age waived to be considered an adult. And so my mother went all around, with very few dollars and talked to people. And everybody said, all the lawyers said, well, I never heard of it, never happened. And, there's no kids doing real estate. And in my case, I had worked in his office, young age, answered the phone. Young people now don't want to work, but I got work ethics because I learned very early. I did everything from go with him to measure houses, to clean the bathrooms, to going with him to show houses. So that got an interest. I mean, he was a mentor. I just, and I was able to see properties all over town. And being poor, the oldest of 10 kids, it attracted my attention.
Wow,
Because 10. And so it got my attention as a young kid that, I want to have a house one day. I want to own something. I'd like to own some of these buildings and houses. And so I pursued it on, and my mother, a woman named Dora Davis, told my mother, she was a real estate broker. She said, baby, take this card and go see this guy, a lawyer named Leonard Goldsteiner. And she said, tell him I told you. She was a black woman who sold a lot of farmland all over East Texas. And we did. And my mother took him $500, which was the hardest $500 that she had to work for. But she believed in me, and that's why now I never let people tell me what you can't do.
Yeah.
And that's why now I just praise those mothers out there, because my mother was an inspiration in my life, and she had to work even with the odds. And she always said, never give up. She said, you always have to stand tall. You may have some weak days, but you got to keep at it.
Yeah.
And she took that down, and the lawyer went to court, got my report card, everything I was doing in school. And the judge.
Now, how old are you at this point?
I'm 65 now.
No. I'm talking about
I was
at that time.
about 15.
So around 14, 15 years old.
Right.
I was just trying to figure out how old were you when you had to go
I was young.
to the courts and do all that.
So I was 15, about 14, 15.
Wow.
And so he said, you know what, if we will grant him this eligibility to have his age waiver. And so I was. At that time, you had to be 21 to get a license.
Yes.
And they granted my eligibility to be able to get a license, and then I had another fall. I had to have the hours that was required by the Texas Real Estate Commission, and so then I had to go to U of H, and U of H said no to me because they said, we don't have young people these youngsters going to school talking about getting a license. So again, my mother was very persistent. My mother said, well, just give my child a chance. Let him come to the classes. And the dean of the School of Business of U of H, I remember so well, told my mother, said, you know, he probably won't pass, because it was several classes that I had to take. I passed all the classes. I passed the classes. They gave me an opportunity to take the Texas license. I passed the Texas license, and I became licensed as a realtor.
Wow.
And I was 16. When I graduated from high school, I made more money than my high school teacher did. My high school teacher was making around $15,000. I made more than a little more than $15,000.
Wow.
But it was grateful to who supported me, though.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so glad to be here at the Forward Times with Karen, and how I loved her mother just dearly, like she was my own mother, is that they gave me opportunity. The Forward Times wrote the first major story about me getting my real estate license. And it was through Dahl Carter,
Yes.
who put me on the front page of the paper.
Yes.
And people in the community, because people, you know, they read these other papers, but they read the Forward Times.
Right.
And what was so good about it, you know, we'll pick up bad stories, but here was a good story of a young person, you know, who was able to. I still wonder, you know, how I did it, but I know I did it, you know, because God was in the mix.
Yeah.
I know I did it because of my mother's support, and I knew I did it sacrifice. I would study that book, that real estate book, like there was no tomorrow. When my high school classmates was playing football and running in basketball and running around, I was studying for the Texas real estate exam. And so I know if you preserve yourself and you make yourself available and you study something, that you can prevail. But I was just so blessed to have Mr. Coleman, because he was a mentor. And that's what I try to do even in my business with Womack Development. I'm reaching out to say, you know, I'm 65 now, but there are other young people out there that their parents tell them, go to real estate school, you know, go to be a doctor, go to be a lawyer. And I say, go be a real estate broker, go buy properties, go build a building downtown, go buy a huge apartment complex in your neighborhood, you know, go and be a developer of a subdivision. So real estate offers us all those kind of benefits. I know there was a friend of mine, a doctor, client of mine for a long time. He would always tell me, he said, you know, I went to medical school, I was a chief medical doctor for a hospital. I was a director of the City of Houston medical health department. He said, I've been all this, but I've had to come over and borrow from you. He said, if my parents would have just told me that I could be a doctor and I had other opportunities, I understood what investments was about. He said, I could have really used my investments that I made, the money that I made, I could have invested in better areas. So I've been very blessed I've seen it all, and I've been a part of it all. And people always tell me, they say, well, how did you do it? I just had priorities, and I made priorities. When people were buying cars, I was buying real estate. See, when people were buying expensive suits and shoes and material things, I was trying to find a way I could buy real estate with that money.
Yeah.
And every time I made any source of money, I was always buying some property. Yeah. And when I was buying that property, I was always improving it, because it was my goal in real estate. And people think real estate, you know, you get there fast, it's fast. It's not a fast money. It's about service.
Right.
You got to be willing to work with people. You got to be willing to serve. But as I did invest in that money, I was willing to give back to the community. And then people knew that if Gerald Womack represented you, that it was not about the money, that it was about the service, that you were going to get good service, and that you will be able to have, which a lot of people tell me that now, they looking at that wealth that they were able to build. Because I worked with finance companies, I gave them plenty of help back then about how redlining was happening, and how they were not giving loans in minority communities, in particular in the Third Ward and this neighborhood. I brought lenders in here that never were doing loans. And if they told me no, they couldn't do the loan, they had to explain to me why. Why my client couldn't get the loan. And regardless who it may be, they had to explain. And I really realized I would go from one bank to the next. If they would say no, and they would redline this neighborhood, I would say, okay, it's time for us to go to another lender, another bank. And so that was important because I had to build that clientele of clients where people trusted me and where they believed that I could, be able to get it done. And gosh, I have helped so many families. I can go throughout this community, house by house, community by community, and tell you that either I sold them or I had something to do with that particular transaction.
Yeah.
So it has been good.
So going back to now the gentrification the G word. There's a lot of what I believe, quite honestly, Gerald, maybe some confusion about the whole concept of gentrification because it doesn't just, I do believe that there is systematic racism.
Oh, absolutely.
In many of our systems,
right?
Including real estate. You just mentioned the lending institutions with redlining, and it's not only redlining that took place with the lending, but also with the selling and purchasing of homes in certain areas where they didn't want, just like the Jews, you said, wasn't allowed to go to River Oaks. Black people weren't either. In certain areas of town, they keep you out.
Well, even with the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration,
yeah,
it was harder for them. They did not want to do a loan in this neighborhood unless the house had to be in perfect condition. And so that caused a lot of our borrowers, a lot of the people in the African American community, they had nowhere else to go but go to Missouri City and some of these other neighborhoods because they would not want to do financing on these homes because of their age. And so that was a way that people of color had no choice because 203, when you got a 203B loan, that meant that you could get in that house with 3 or 5% down. And in most cases, most African-American families, black and brown, didn't have a lot of money. And so if they had to move further out, they had no choice if they wanted to buy a house. Because if they went out and got an appraisal process, the appraisers, who mostly times did not look like us, and in most cases did not think anything of our neighborhoods, didn't think that there was any value in our neighborhoods, and so they weren't able to get a loan. We had to go to people like Riverside Bank back then. That's why Riverside Bank was so important, because we had to—
Which is now Unity.
Yes, which is now Unity, but back then, Riverside Bank under Dr. Carroll, they financed a lot of home loans because FHA was not doing them. People were not veterans, and FHA felt that their appraisers felt that there was really no value in those neighborhoods, and that the real value is in the land.
Yeah.
And that stuff probably need to be torn down and people didn't need to buy it, and that the economic life, which means that 30, 40 years from now, that it wouldn't be worth nothing.
Yeah.
And that's how gentrification all started.
So let's talk about it. What is gentrification? I mean, explain it in layman's terms, because I have a thought process. I've done some research of my own, but can you explain from your perspective what you know gentrification to be?
Well, it means that you got a different class of people that are moving in, and they are eager to buy the land at any cost, and they realize the value that is in that property, in that land, and they have seeked out to buy it, even though at any cost. And that means that you've had a lot of folks to move in to say that it is for sale, and there is a cost that you would sell. And we've had that happen in so many cases where our folks did not understand the real value of the land that they had. They didn't know what their rights were. They didn't know the laws that reflect them as it relates to the taxes. We had a lot of families that the loved ones, mom and dad, grandpa, grandma had passed on. The siblings was left in the house. They just lived there, and they didn't pay any taxes. They didn't maintain the property. And all of a sudden, they got a phone call or someone knocked at their door that didn't look like us. And in some cases, they looked like us. They paid black people to go knock on other black folks' doors to tell them to sell. And the first thing they told them, they said, "We got cash." And they took the first cash without consulting a broker, realizing what that property was worth, realizing what their rights were, that they had some equity in the property. They just took it and they sold it, or they lost it. And in the case that they lost it, what happened is you got our municipalities, with the county, the city, the school district, who had a map of all these properties that were delinquent in taxes. And nobody said anything. And what they did is they went and they foreclosed. And what happened in the early 80s, when we went through that of the interest rates being so high, where people lost their properties. And so we did lose out a lot there. A lot of investors bought in. And then in the 90s, what happened is the taxes again start going up. And Houston, being a major city that it is, people realized the freeway and the congestion that we had, the hours that it take on the freeway to drive and back into Houston, and the growth of downtown. They built the George R. Brown Center. They built several other new high-rise buildings downtown, till people got an idea, hey, there's something good about that east side and something about owning property in the inner city. They had one group about 20 years ago in the Third Ward that came from Israel. They bought every property that was in the Third Ward area that they can buy at every sale at $5 a square foot. And they banked that property. They went to the foreclosure sale and they banked it. Now that same property, they still own some of it now. And they selling for that, where they paid $5, they selling it for $40 and $50 a foot, the same property that they bought for $5, that a lot of our families that were African Americans owned. And they owned it because they didn't know. They wasn't educated enough to know really what their rights are. They didn't know that now that if you are lived in a house with grandmother and you 65 and grandmother died and you 65, that you don't have to have the other heirs to live in the house. They didn't have to live there. All you got to do is claim it as your homestead, and then you could homestead exemption it, or you could over 65 exemption, so you wouldn't have to pay taxes.
So Gerald, I think one of the things, and the reason I asked you about your definition of gentrification is that there's this conversation that's had as if, gentrification is like the boogeyman. It's like, there's this nefarious attempt, like somebody, Big Brother is at the top with this elaborate scheme and plan to get rid of all the black people in the neighborhood, overprice everything to get them out. Is that true, or is it a combination of us, like you say, not knowing, our rights or where we stand, but also just giving our property away?
Well, I believe that it's a combination of both.
Okay.
Yeah, there are people out there. There's a map right now, a tape that's why you get all these calls every 5 minutes in Texas, because they know.
And there's literature too in the mail.
Right. They know in zip code 7704 to 133, these zip codes, that is prime property. It's close in the downtown. And their mission is to go and get it, even if you don't want to sell it, even if they got to pay somebody to look like you to knock on your door and tell you that they're buying it, and actually they're not buying it. Even though if they're telling you that we'll give you a hard money loan at 20%, like I'm getting a lady calling me, she bought a house at 12%, not 20. She's paying $2,200 a month, and now she can't pay it, and she's about to lose the house because the hard money loan people gave her a loan. Her husband is not working. They can't pay the $2,200 a month. They paid almost $200,000. They had the house for 4 years, and now they're losing it. They're going to lose it this coming month because there are loan sharks out there. This is how these people are making money, and they are doing that. But on the other hand, there are instances where people are not educated. And there are instances where people now, too, they read these stories, they get on TV and they read this flip, that I'm in a flipping game. And so I don't care who it is or what color it may be. I will go out and I will buy the house at a low price. I'll buy it and fix it up and resell it. In the meantime, while they're flipping, our tax values are going up, and we've got an appraisal district who will go on those sales in that neighborhood in the last 12 months. And if you compare that to other neighborhoods where they got a cap that go up only 10% every year, you will see in our neighborhoods the cap rate is going up at a higher number. And a lot of it is education, because we're not educating our people that they should protest their taxes every year, that they should get with their neighbors on their block to make sure that you do it. This is why I got a group of people on Alameda. This is why I come to Karen, and we go together. We pull other people's taxes to make sure that we're not being charged more than what the other neighbors are. And if we are, why? And we go to the appraisal district and protest. But if you go through this community, you go through the city of Houston and go in these zip codes, the participation of black families participating in that process is very slim. And that is because we have not educated. We have not ensured and made sure that the Harris County Appraisal District come to our communities, not just come to a rally. Go to our churches and have rallies and talk about the appraisal process. Explain to them what their rights are, what they can and can't do. And then we got to tell our folks, everybody knock at your door to say that they have money, reverse mortgages. We have lost a whole generation of mortgages our folks owe right now, way more than the property value of the house is. In most cases, when they have reverse mortgages, the family are not able to go back and get a loan because they owe way more than what the cost is. So they've got to, if they don't know to get a short sale, they lose the house, and the investor gets it again because he will go to the foreclosure sale and buy it for less than the value. So we have still a lot of education to do. And the first thing we've got to do is organize our community, let them know that you don't have to sell. And that you should get consultants, you should get real estate people, if it's not me, somebody else who professionals, to explain to you really what your value is. When you go to the doctor and you got a heart problem, you're going to go to that heart doctor to say, please explain to me what is the condition of my heart. But when you get into your real estate transaction, you're going to let some John Blow show up at your door and all of a sudden tell you how much your house is worth. And he doesn't even have the experience. He don't even have the license to do it. And you're going to take it on his word that he says that he's going to give you cash, and you're going to take that cash without even consulting with anybody, a lawyer or somebody in that expert to explain to you really what you have. You don't have to sign up with them. You don't have to pay them. You can ask them just give you a comparison. Explain to me, what is my house worth? Or what is my property worth? What can I get for it? What did my neighbor's property sell for? And then you got to understand that just because the appraisal district says your house or your property is worth something, it doesn't mean that it's worth that. I've had the appraisal district in our neighborhoods every year go up on the people who did not protest. And it wasn't the real value. They went up on the value because they do a map of a neighborhood that nobody talks about and say it should be this value.
Why isn't anybody talking about it?
We talk about it, but we have to legislate. Like, I'm very happy that Senator Boris Miles had a forum at Wheeler Avenue about 2 weeks ago, and had the appraisal district out there, had the tax authority out there to explain the rights and tell people that your tax authority, you could get a payment plan. So you could pay on it. You don't have to just necessarily outright lose it or don't pay it. And what we've got to deal with people is that I deal with straight up, like, you could never think, if I ain't got it, I ain't got it. What can you do? You know what I mean? And I learned that early on. You can't dodge something that you know that's going to be the evident. It's going to happen. So you got to be able to deal with your business and your family's wealth straight up. And you can't depend upon it and say, well, the white man came and took it, when you had an opportunity to work with it and save it.
And see, that's the challenge that I have with us.
Right.
Because I think a lot of it also falls on us.
Yeah, well, pride, you know, some of us have a lot of pride. We think even in this day that nobody knows. And with computer and technology, there's nothing that we can't find out. I have people tell me one thing, and then we get on my computer just like that. We pull the deed, we pull all information. We know everything instantly.
Yeah.
And so there's no pride in this world right now. If you got a problem, you got to deal with it straight up.
Yeah.
But you got to deal with business. You got to protest your taxes. You got to be able to explain, why is my taxes going up? Why?
And see, that's the
And
challenge.
so-
That's what I'm saying. That's the challenge, because proactively, you know, we can't make. We got to stop making excuses,
Right.
and we got to challenge ourselves, our community, to be different, do different. And I understand. If you don't know, you don't know. I do understand that. I have empathy for people that are ignorant to the law or ignorant to situations, but you don't always have to remain ignorant. You can always educate yourself, empower yourself. So the question is how and why. I'll give you a prime example of something that you talked about just a second ago that happened to my own family. My grandfather, or my dad's father, built with his own hands 3 properties located prime area in 3rd Ward. One day I get a call from the daughter of my aunt, who lived with my grandparents all her life. And her daughter lived with her all her life. And they lived in the same house in primary house in 3rd Ward. Big Mama passed, and then eventually my grandfather passed. And she was living in there with her daughter for those many years. Little did I know that they were not paying the taxes. And she was under the impression that because he was getting that homestead exemption, that homestead exemption was going to just continue on, you know, because taxes were not being paid. Because he was, of course, getting that homestead exemption. So after his passing, those taxes continued to compile, and then penalties and interest. And I get this call saying, hey, we need you to sign over. My dad passed.
Right.
He was the only
His
sibling
interest.
that had passed. Sign over everybody's interest to her so that she can get the exemption and get put on a plan and all, like you talked about, to take care of the taxes. And I said, well, no, I'm not signing over my father's interest, which is now my interest, to you. But what I would be willing to do is myself.
Right.
I'll pay the taxes, and the penalties and interest.
And you sign over.
And y'all sign over
the
to
interest
me,
to
and
me.
then I'll make sure that, everybody is on paper, get your fair share if and when, the property is sold. But if it's sold, but sign it over to me, and I'll handle that. But on top of that, y'all gonna have to pay rent.
Right.
So that we can make sure that the taxes, insurance, and everything can be taken care of ongoing. Because insurance is another thing, not just the taxes. And so they didn't want to do that.
Right. But they would, in most cases, what has happened in our community, they would rather lose the property than let another heir get that property. And I've seen it over and over. Well, I think it's this generation of thing. It's about black people. It all goes back to trust. That we've got to be able to trust each other. And I don't know what happened to us that we lost that trust with each other. Because the way I was raised up, it was 10 kids, but all of my family, we all lived there together. We didn't even realize how poor we were. But we all shared bread, meals, shoes, clothes. And it was a trust factor. I mean, that's how we were raised up. But a lot of times, this division, one can get a little better than the other, or the other one don't want the other to know that they're a little downer than the other. So it's that just envious that you don't even know was there. I know I've had it in my family. I didn't even know until my brother apologized to me. He said, I hated you all these years. And he said, I'm just so sorry because it was just ignorance on my part. But he said, I was it was the fact that you was always excelling and doing more. And I took that, as a love, again, more for my brother, because he at least told me that. He told me in later life, But he said it was just something about the way I was advancing, and he wasn't. You know, and
So it really was an indictment on him, himself, not you.
Not me, but he had
You were a
that.
touch point.
I was a touch point, but I, you know, I loved him to no end, and he, I love him even more so now because what he said to me.
Yeah.
And we were able to work through those differences. And he said, you know what? It was just a psychological thing.
Yeah.
My mind was wrapped up somewhere else where I should have been doing what you were doing, but I wasn't willing to do it.
Yeah.
And so my mind got wrapped up. And we did that exercise with another member of our family because we wanted my nephews to understand how that got wrapped up. And it was educational for my nephews, and I didn't even know it was coming out. We were calling ourselves chastising my nephew, and my brother expelled it out. And that was the most heart-lifting thing, you know, for him to tell. But he wanted my nephews to get that, to say that, hey, we all in the same family. Yeah. We all will stick together. And I had that little resentment with me for no reason. And I knew it was wrong. But I'm telling you, this is not the way that we as a family gonna operate. We all will stick together. So a lot of times families gotta get together and they gotta bring this craziness out because the man wants to take that property. And once they take it, you're not gonna get it back.
You're not getting it back.
And I always sell to my clients out there, I say, you know, if you don't get the right price now, you ain't gonna be able to come back and buy it. Very seldom you could come back because they got more money than we do.
Yeah.
They had a trust fund. We didn't get that 40 acres in a mule.
Yeah.
You know, I'm the first generation of real wealth that has to spread on to hopefully the next generation. And I've got to make sure that my generation do something with it. My relatives don't get a job and show up just because they're black. They've got to go through all kind of different changes that others don't have to go through. Yeah. And so our wealth is different. And our kids' minds are also different. And that's why it's so important that we educate our young people. You know, I make sure that if I'm spending $1, where that dollar's going. I'm trying to spend it not just because it's black. I'm trying to spend it back in the same circle of people that do business with me. Yeah. And I'm not prejudiced. I'm not racist. Some of my best friends are white, and they come to my rescue a whole lot of time. But at the same time, I know what it means to build wealth. I know what it means when I came up in this Third Ward neighborhood that was mostly owned in a lot of cases by black families, and now it's not. I sell houses now that were back then $150,000 that are now $600,000 that flippers that came in and bought for cheap and sold at a higher price. I know now in this day and time, people that could buy a house for $800,000 over here. Now the interest rate is 6% and 7%. They can only afford a $400,000 house. And I know now this is what gentrification does. Gentrification separates the have and the have-nots, because the only people now that could move in this neighborhood are people with affluent incomes. And even when they affluent incomes and they look like us, they still have a stigma about if they want to live in Third Ward. And then when they had the stigma about Third Ward, I've had them later to come back when they moved out to that subdivision where all the houses look alike. Right. And they try to come back. They can't sell that house. Yeah. And if they would have moved to Third Ward, their wealth would have been greater. Yeah. The property value would have been greater. Or they're telling me, I wish I coulda, woulda, shoulda. Yeah. So gentrification is just coming in different specifications. But I also know, which is important, is that the schools got to be right. Because everybody wants their kids to have a good education. And so we got to make sure with this gentrification that we promote the Houston Independent School District, and they put programs back in our schools, because my mother sent me to school in this neighborhood because she knew I was going to get a good education. Yeah. She knew the teachers, she knew the counselors, and she knew that the school I was going to, they were going to have real school teaching in that school room. And so we have to certainly promote good schools. We got to promote other amenities. I'm very displeased about other franchise that is not owned by blacks that are now moving in, that we don't have the opportunity of ownership, that we've got we buy Starbucks, but Starbucks still not good enough to come on Alameda because all of a sudden they feel that the traffic count is not here. When you drive down Alameda, you can't even get down Alameda at certain times of day because it's bumper to bumper. But then at the same time, those of us who do own our property have maintained. Our taxes has gone up so much. The taxes, my taxes, it went from $5 a square foot to $55 just on the land. In the museum district, I have an 8-unit building, went from $260,000 now to taxes because they built this high-rise building up 3 blocks across, Southmore. They've got that building assessed to almost $1 million, $967,000, which means the taxes, the same tenants, which means the taxes is around $22,000 a year for a building that I'm getting about maybe $1,000 a month for 8 units that I was paying, start paying $6,000 or $7,000. So gentrification will happen just by taxation.
Yeah, and
because if they figure,
Gerald, because I'm trying to figure out how is that even fair and legal? Because it's like, okay, I can understand somebody bought a piece of property that was probably initially valued at $600,000. They bought it for $800,000. Well, tax that entity or that piece of property for $800,000. But why do you have to bump mine up? How is that helping me? How is that helping you as the appraisal district if you're not having to make any improvements? I'm not making any improvements on my property. It's the same property, same land, same building, whatever. Nothing has changed, but yet you're gonna bump me up 30%?
Well, they bump you up because guess what they say is that this developer who built 6 townhomes next to your lot paid $300,000 or $200,000 for that lot. And the best use for that particular your house, which you don't want to sell, or your apartment building, which I don't want to sell, I don't want to tear it down. People live there, they've been living there. They have nowhere else to go for that kind of rent. So they say, well, you know, the best use for that land now is there's no value in the building, the value in the land. So if you even did any improvements to the building, you're paying double. You're paying for the land and you're also paying for the improvements, which means your taxes went up. Now, mind me, the appraisal district argues and the municipalities argues that, you know, that's what we're in business for. We got to collect taxes. But you just built 5 or 6 townhomes on that same lot that you wasn't getting that much taxes on.
That's the point that I'm making.
But in the meantime, you want to force me out.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want that 3-story townhome.
I didn't ask for it.
I didn't want that 3-story townhome next to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I would rather another single-family home, or I would have rather a duplex or something next to me, or another house. But I didn't want that. But in the meantime, you're getting on that one lot, you're getting a tax base of 6 houses where it was 1.
Right.
But at the same time, you're going to bump my land costs up.
You're punishing me.
Yeah, you're punishing me. You're
for
going to say
somebody else's
right,
improvement.
and then you're going to go to your district, and then y'all going to go and analyze, and say, well, you know, it's not the building, it's the land that you're sitting in, and then we pay people to go to the appraisal district, and they sit there, and when we come to the district, they look at us like. And a lot of them look like us. They look at like us and say, well, our hands are tied. We can't do anymore. Because they've already went out to your neighborhood, and according to the comps that we see by these new developers, and this is gentrification that I'm talking about, these new developers who will not be there that long. And if you go back 10 years later and you start looking around 3rd Ward on these same townhomes that are built who have no homeowners association, who you look at where they need maintenance just as worse as your house did 30 years ago because the stucco is peeling off and they hadn't painted it. And then they got that tax statement of what they paid, and they can't even maintain their property. They're paying the taxes higher. I just worry, what will it look like in the years to come? Because some of these same neighborhoods, in our neighborhoods that we have pushed our folks out, some of these same places, I'm not sure that they will be able to maintain at the value and the conditions that they're in. And I'm not sure that we won't have another white flight out because they can move out
At any moment.
at any moment. They have the resources, they have the money. If that 3-story townhome that people don't want to live in, they can leave it and say to hell with it, because they could go back to another bank and get another loan because they have the resources to be able to do it. They have the income.
And move to one of the
And
lands.
they can move one of the lands or wherever they want to move to. So I'm just not sure what it all will come to. I know that a lot of neighborhoods have civic clubs. I believe that people should be advocate of their neighborhood. They should be advocate of what goes on. They should be advocate what happens with Metro transportation in their neighborhood and what the garbage pickup is and what the new municipal laws is as it relates to your neighborhoods, because that all controls, that's all talked about gentrification, because there are some people who do want to control the neighborhoods and they want to make it to their best convenience. And if there are ways that they could push certain people out, that is their way to do it, through the municipality, through the government, through the city council.
Yeah.
And do it through regulations. So we have to be vigilant, but you got to go to people who have the community best at heart.
Yeah.
And I'm encouraging all community leaders, all churches, all citizen group, all elected officials is certainly pay attention, because Wesley Chapel Church should not have been sold and moved out of our neighborhood. That church should have been maintained. It is a prominent piece of land in our community. Emancipation should not be filled up with new townhomes just scattered out. It should be talked about convenience stores, retail center, things of that nature, businesses that people could open. And I'm not sure that what is being built for all of us. And home ownership is so important. Our parents starved. I bought the first house in my family. It was $29,000. And my mother was thrilled that we owned a house with a yard, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a den. You know, she was just thrilled, that piece of ownership of that land. And so I really am concerned about that we promote building single-family homes for families.
Let me say this, because this is another thing that's been a sticking point for me. And, you know, I'm an elected official.
Right.
I'm out of Missouri City. And then we have some older parts of Missouri City where there's a lion's share of black people that moved out there from 3rd Ward, South Park, 5th Ward.
I used to take them to Chasewood and Briargate.
Right, in that areas.
But they couldn't move in here.
But the thing about it is, now there's a complaint of lack of amenities and a lack of investment, and everything is moving out to Highway 6 and Sienna and all that, because these are areas that were undeveloped, that are now being developed. So whatever the modernization is, you know, they're going to build everything according to current standards and building codes. So you have all of these older properties and convenience stores and retail centers and whatnot, where the old movie theater was on Texas Parkway, which is being renovated, by the way, right now. But it was someone that is not black, that is over $5 million in on this deal, which is $2 million, over $2 million more than what they even wanted to invest on that property. But they're in it now. And so the thing about it is, and his point was, you know, he would have not done this if he would have known all of the things that the city was going to require to bring it up to code, because it had been neglected for so long. I say all that to say, it disturbs me, Gerald, when I hear a lot of African Americans complain about gentrification, complain about the lack of investment and want all of these things. They want the bells and the whistles and the top this and that, and they want these types of sit-down family dining restaurants and all these types. They want the modernized buildings and the upkeep and all that, but there's not African Americans coming together to pool their resources to buy these undeveloped land or to build the sort of things or develop the sort of things that they say they want in the community. So to me, it can become a challenge because if you don't have the money or if you don't come together to bring the money together to do these things, you leave it up to other people that do not look like you, that do have the money, to come in and do it. And that leads to this so-called gentrification, in my opinion, not just with the houses, but I'm talking about commercial property, retail, warehouses, office buildings, etc.
Well, I believe that we do have several African Americans who are in their own way developing. You may not hear about them, but they are in Houston. And they are doing it. They're builders, they're developers, there's nonprofit groups. They are, but it's very difficult for financing. Still, there is roadblocks. That is different, and there is an issue of trust. There is an issue of people, our leadership of people who do make the money, willing to put it in our neighborhoods. A lot of times we forget where we come from. You know, a lot of times, and I've always kept that in mind, you know, where I came from. I've never been too proud to say I came from 3rd Ward and I was raised at Truck Seller and Darling, because that's where I came from. But a lot of people feel, there are a lot of folks who got there. They may be in their big fancy houses and they drive their big fancy cars, and they have this mindset that they're better, and they don't need to do it with anybody else. They can do it by themselves. But I believe that I know I keep trying to advocate. I don't get, like I did early on, the athletes that I had early on that had money when the Allers was here. Because guess what? They don't come around us, the Rockets. They don't come to black businesses and do business, and the coaches and the people there don't send them to us because they're too afraid that we might get them and get their ear to invest in something in our own community. And so a lot of that is because our leadership has to enforce that Tillman Fertittas, who owns the Rockets, and the Texans and McNairs, why aren't they doing business? These young people who are making all this money, why can't they do business with some people that look like us? And then they can get there. That's how I made it in my business. I made it through professional black folks who did business with me. And I was able to share some of that wealth with them. I was able to encourage them to buy some other properties, and they did it. There are a lot of people who did it. There are a lot of people who own their own office buildings that I sold to them, and that I was an example that you can do it, and you should own your office. You shouldn't be renting the space. But this in the last 10, 15 years, you know, we've had it so well. Black people have had it so well. We went off to college. We came back as doctors and lawyers and professional people. We worked downtown in the big oil companies. We didn't think we need to live in the inner city. We didn't even think we needed to invest in our neighborhoods. And because we thought that the grass was so greener in these other neighborhoods, till we forgot where we really came from. We forgot our roots. And so we still have to advocate to them that if it wasn't for people like Dog Carter, Lenora Carter, and others who paved the way for us to have an opportunity here in Houston, to be able to have those jobs. You know, Moses Leroy, I remember way back when, Howard Milton, Mac Hanna. You know, you couldn't get a loan. Mac Hanna, even when I was coming up, you know, 30, 40 years ago, I went to him and borrowed $1,000, and he lent it to me. I was just getting started. He gave it to me right out of the pocket. I never forgot that. But he did everybody that way, every architect or every professional black person that I could remember that needed a loan and had their own business and didn't have all their taxes and stuff together. They knew to go to Daddy Mac, and Mac Hanna would make those loans available. So we lost all of that. And our people felt that it was a little better on that greener side, that I had to live out somewhere else. I didn't want to live over there. I didn't want my kids over there. And it was so much better. But it's still opportunities. I still see now, with all this activity that's going on Alameda, that black folks, young black people, want to live in this neighborhood. And they are buying townhomes They are interested in buying homes. They're interested in flipping homes. So it is changing. That perception is changing. So, you know, we just got to weed out the folks who don't know. We still got a whole lot of folks who don't know. And we got to make sure that we build affordable housing on some of this land that we've got preserved that should go for affordable housing, that we don't let the city and our other municipalities forget about making that land available so people can buy. And that it's affordable.
I got a couple of more quick things before we close because we're up against the clock.
I know it.
And this has been great conversation, and I plan to have you back.
Good.
I do want you to know, and you may not even remember this yourself, but back in 1997,
yes,
I bought my first house through Womack Development at 2716 Wichita and Delano.
I remember.
Corner lot right there with a garage apartment. And I sold that house years later because I was young. I was putting all this investment. I was like, man, I cannot keep doing all this, investing in this property. And I ended up selling it through Womack Development. So, you know, you definitely were instrumental in my first acquisition and first sale.
Oh, good. Well,
and the second home purchase. Too.
Well, I appreciate that. I've been so blessed to have had the experience that I've had, and people in Houston have been so great to me. I mean, they have been phenomenal as it relates to service and them coming back to me over and over again.
Yeah.
And I've just kept this motto, that I've never been driven by money. I've been driven by service, what I can do for others, and it has benefited me a long ways. And as I said earlier, I never forgot where I came from, because I could have been any one of these other folks on the streets, and that's why I don't look down on our brothers and sisters. I know that we've got to help educate them, and they've got to reach back and get rid of this pride.
Yeah.
If you got a problem, call somebody that can help you.
So real quickly, what would you say top three things that as takeaways that we need to do to stave off this gentrification attack that people are changing it from Third Ward to the Museum District or Midtown or Edo?
Well, the one thing that we've got to do is we've got to know what we got. Location is everything, and the value of your land is important. You got to know what you own, and you've got to have somebody to explain it to you. What is my real value? You don't have to have a plan. You got to get out of that mode that, you got to live in this fancy house. And if it's falling down, go out and research it and find some resources or find ways that you could fix it up. And then if you have title problems, go get with your siblings and work that situation out. Don't let your property just sit there and you sit in it and you're not paying any taxes. The neighborhood is changing and it's going up and you're just sitting there. And you never saw mother's legal problem of if you getting that property in your name. All it is a piece of paper. All it is an heirship. And you get people to justify that you were the heir and the death certificate. I mean, it's simple. You got to ask questions and you got to seek out for advice when you need it.
Yeah.
And the other issue is that we can't let these lenders tell us no. You got to keep going. I never let a bank tell me what I couldn't do. I went to the next bank.
Yeah.
I have several bank accounts because every time my loan officer left a bank, I went with her.
Yeah.
I went with him.
Yeah.
And so you got to seek out and deal with people that can make your situation better.
Yeah.
Employment, job, wealth, all that is important.
Yeah.
But you can't just ignore and just put a deaf ear to it.
Yeah.
You got to pay attention to the details.
Last question I have is about, talk about gentrification, but we also talk about slum and blight in certain areas. And, I've always wondered, you have all of these dilapidated houses and properties, particularly in Third Ward. If you go over there close to 45.
I own a house over there.
And all that. You got all of these houses that's boarded up, a bunch of slum and blight, just been sitting there for decades. the city, is my understanding, owns the majority of these properties.
Well, some cases
So
the
what's
city
going
do,
on?
but in a lot of cases, families still own it and never went back. There are so many properties where the families own, the city didn't want to foreclose. It was so tied up in legal issues till they just running the taxes numbers on it, and it's just about time. Now, what has happened is there are a lot of, with gentrification, there are a lot of those other people will call the taxing authority and tell them and give them the address of that house and tell them that there are issues on that house and they should be foreclosing. So that is happening. An investor will call the Linebarger and say, you know, that house got $25,000 worth of taxes and you all have not foreclosed. Or they may call HISD taxing office and say, you know, that house has not been foreclosed and they're interested to buy it. When they go to the foreclosure sale, they know they can buy it at a cheaper cost. So it goes back to what I'm saying. If your family owns property in these neighborhoods and it's boarded up, you need to check on it and see ways that you could either sell it and get your value out of it, or that you need to go in there and find ways that you can get money to fix it up.
But if the city is owning these
But the
properties,
cities own it. What they're doing is hopefully they are turning these property, and what we're saying, for affordable housing, if they own them.
Yeah, but I mean, they've been sitting there for decades.
Well, they're looking for developers and people who want to possibly fix them. They got to go through a legal process. And right now, with the cost of housing to be the way it is, it's very expensive to build an affordable house right now for the square footage that people and families need. So you got to find a very unique builder, and also the city's got to have appropriate financing. Now, the other problem with Third Ward is that we've got to do the infrastructure. So we've got to tell our elected officials that they've got to do the infrastructure such where the sewage and the drainage and sidewalks, where you go in there and make the amenities such that I want to live there. I don't want to live. My house is down there on Webster. I paid $19,000 for it 20 years ago, but it's a nice house. But you know, I had to put the sidewalk in 20 years ago because it wasn't sidewalks, and still there's a ditch right in the middle of the street. So people don't want to live like that. So we've got to enforce that our city elected officials, who have the city council people and those people, that they go in those neighborhoods now and start doing the sewage, the drainage, and they do sidewalks to make it amenable. So it is attractive for developers and people to want to buy and make those lots more attractive too for them to buy it.
Well, Gerald, man, listen, you are a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for your almost 50 years of service to the community. And I really...
Jones High School, Texas Southern University.
That's all right. You know, so, you know, if somebody had to go to Jones. You know, I went to Jack Yates.
I went to Jesse Jones. My sisters and brothers, some of them went to Yates, so I'm not, you know, everybody get it confused, but I always have to remind them about Jesse Jones, Mr. Pace, who's out in your neighborhood, owns on the school board. He was a mentor. He got me the Evans E. Worthen Scholarship. He was a huge mentor in my life during that time, and he was real proud of me being in real estate. I would go to school half a day, and I would go work in the real estate office. And whatever we can do to promote young people being able to get back in vocational education in public schools, we do need to do that, because there are a lot of opportunities. We can't find workers right now. And a lot of times they don't look like us, and we've got to go back and train them and let them know the plumber makes, everybody needs a plumber.
Absolutely.
An electrician.
I agree, man. We got to get back to the career and technology things to help improve, you know, the pathway for young people, because everybody's not fit for college or going to go to college, but you know, there is a career that they could probably pursue, and you are a prime example of it. 14, 15 years of age, getting your license at 16, you're the man, a great story, man. And again, I plan to have you back because we have so much more to talk about because this is an ongoing conversation, and I know the Forward Times, myself, want to work with you to try to educate this community even more. So thank you so much for being on Real Talk today.
And I thank you for being who you are and what you do for the community and the service that you give. I couldn't thank you enough. And again, you know, my joy just goes out to Lenora Dahl Carter. She, you know, she was an amazing woman, and she's been able through Karen to keep this business going, and I'm so proud of what y'all doing.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. So that'll do it, y'all. We're about to get up out of here. Real Talk Junkies. Make sure you all tune in next week. Share the link with everybody. Like I said, your friends, your family, your foes, your enemies. It doesn't matter. Everybody needs to check out this conversation. ForwardTimes.com for the latest news for and about black community, and JeffreyLBoney.com. Don't forget to get that book, Don't Argue With Me, a no-nonsense approach to the issues in the black community. That'll do it, y'all. Peace. I'm out.